video 4. So this is the last video in our series on exploring your prayer life, and I hope that it's been fruitful. I hope that it's been beneficial. And most importantly, I hope it's just been an opportunity for you to rest and to find some stillness and some quiet and to really deepen your connection with God. And so I hope it's done all of those things and more for you. This practice that we're gonna go over in this last video is called centering prayer. And it's probably one of the simplest practices to explain to someone, but interestingly enough, one of the most difficult ones to put into practice. And I think that's because it's a practice that doesn't require you to really do anything. It's a practice that is asking you to just be. And so this prayer requires no images in your mind, no words, no thoughts, and it actually asks you to empty your mind of thoughts so that you can simply rest in the presence of God. So this is different than some of the other practices we've explored in this series. With Lectio Divina, you certainly had words in your mind. You were reading words, you were processing words, you were listening for a word from God. There are no words in centering prayer. In the Examine, a lot of you probably chose maybe to do a guided form, maybe with the form that was at the end of the video that I guided you through, or maybe using the app where you were reading through the different prompts. And so certainly you had thoughts and reflections that you were supposed to be doing as a part of that type of prayer practice. And so centering prayer is very different from those other two practices that we've explored in this series. And so it can be a bit challenging because there's not a lot that's given to you to kind of focus your attention or focus your thoughts, because you're not supposed to be having thoughts. So this is really a time where you're supposed to experience silence and silence from noises that are external and internal. And that can be daunting and that can be difficult for us. If you've ever tried any sort of meditation practice or mindfulness practice, you maybe are familiar with some of the frustrations of trying to empty your mind of thoughts. It's not an easy thing to do. It's something that our brains kind of naturally resist and our bodies kind of naturally resist. And so it can be difficult and it can be frustrating. But I always think of a quote from Father Thomas Keating, who is someone who kind of revitalized centering prayer and wrote about it a lot and kind of made it accessible to those that were even outside of a cloistered environment. And he's known as saying that silence is God's first language. Everything else is a poor translation. So for me, centering prayer is trying to learn a way to communicate with God in the language of God. And I think it's a powerful opportunity for us to experience something really, truly beautiful. Another spiritual teacher that I really love and admire, Father Richard Rohr, he has this beautiful quote that I think kind of encapsulates what you can find and experience through a practice like centering prayer. And he says, "In some form of wordless contemplative prayer, you are letting yourself be known nakedly by God, with no pretense, no perfect words, no performance principle whatsoever. Like a mirror, you just allow yourself to be seen exactly as you are. All God can love is who you really are, your true self, because that's the only thing that exists anyway. If you have to make yourself better or judge yourself to be worse, you are not allowing the perfect and unconditional gaze of God." And I think that's what centering prayer can offer us, is a chance to experience that unconditional, loving gaze of God. So I said the practice of centering prayer is easy to explain. So let me take just a couple minutes to walk you through the steps, if you will, of centering prayer. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to pick a time limit. Now, in traditional centering prayer teaching, it is said that you should do a centering prayer sit for 20 minutes twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening. If you felt something and you seized up when I said that you needed to sit in silence for 20 minutes twice a day, don't worry. That's not what I'm going to ask you to do right now, even though if you feel like that's where you want to start, go for it. I know for most people that just seems like too much, and doesn't seem like an attainable goal. It doesn't seem like something that you'll be capable of doing, and I get that. That's exactly how I felt the first time I started trying centering prayer. And so what I'm going to suggest to you is that if 20 minutes seems like too much, then can you start with 5 minutes? I had a professor that I heard lecture on centering prayer one time, and he was kind of going through this same type of spiel of if 20 minutes seems like too much. And he said, give God 5 minutes of your time and see if you don't want more. So that's what I want to encourage you to do. If 20 minutes seems like too much, start with 5. If you can do 5, do 5. See if you don't want more. If you can do 10, do 10. If you can do 15, do 15. Start where you feel like you can feel comfortable in accomplishing this, because I feel like that's the important thing, is that you set a time limit that you feel is doable for you for where you are right now. Do what is best for you. So figure out that time limit, and then I want you to use some sort of timer. So if you have a phone, I would suggest put your phone on Do Not Disturb, so that the only thing that'll be functioning on your phone is the timer you'll be using. You won't be able to get text messages or notifications or anything like that. But if you want to use your phone, you can. There is a centering prayer app that I use, and essentially the function of the app is that it has a timer to it. The nice thing about having a timer is that is one less thing for your mind to obsess over. If you know that there is a timer that's going to tell you when it's time to stop, you don't have to constantly worry about how long have you been sitting. Do you need to check your watch? Do you need to check a clock? So I really highly suggest using a timer. Your mind does not need one more thing to worry about while you're sitting and doing a centering prayer sit. So if you want to use the centering prayer app, it's called Centering Prayer, and it's put out by Contemplative Outreach. So it's really easy to search for, and you'll find it. The other great thing about that app is that it allows you to pick a sound that'll start and end your time. And there you have some really nice, like, gentle kind of bells or chimes that are kind of not as jarring as some alarm sounds can be. It also allows you to pick either a scripture or a prayer to start and end your time in centering prayer. So it has a couple of neat little features, but it's a very basic app, and it's not going to do a lot for you other than set your time. The next thing you'll do after you have established your time limit and you've set your timer is that you're going to pick a sacred word. So this is called a sacred word, or it can be called a grounding word or a word of intention. So our intention with centering prayer is to rest and sit in the presence of God. And so it's helpful to have a word that is going to remind you of that intention. Now, I know I said centering prayer has no words in it, so this is the one exception. But this word is for the intended purpose of drawing you back into the presence of God, reminding you of your intention, and to help you set thoughts aside. So for a lot of people, they'll pick a sacred word that is maybe a favorite name of God. So maybe you pick Father or Mother or Creator, Sustainer, Jesus. Maybe you pick a word like love, or maybe you pick a word like be still or return, peace. So anything that's going to help you refocus your attention back on the presence of God in the present moment. And you'll use this word anytime that thoughts, feelings, or sensations creep in. So thoughts will go into your mind. You might start to have some kind of emotional reaction. And then there might be sensations, and that might just be like you need to scratch your arm or something starts to itch. Anytime something interrupts your focus and your attention on that present moment and being present to God, that is when you're going to bring in that sacred word or that grounding word. And you'll say it a few times to kind of recenter yourself. So after you've picked your sacred word, you're then going to find a comfortable position to sit in. What is suggested for any type of practice where you're sitting, so whether it's a meditative practice or centering prayer practice or something like it, It's best to sit in a position that you don't feel like you're going to have to fidget around a whole lot. So I suggest sitting in a comfortable chair where your feet can be planted firmly on the ground. Your back can be supported in a straight position, so a high back chair or a couch, and then hands in your lap. So that is what I suggest, but you have to find what's best for you, because maybe you have some sort of physical kind of ailment or something in your body. Your body is different every day. Maybe something is sore or tense, and so you have to find a position that is right for you. I will say, laying down, you do run the risk of falling asleep, and honestly, if you fall asleep, maybe that's exactly what your body needed. But I do suggest sitting upright with a straight spine, feet on the floor, hands in your lap. So that's my suggestion. Please do find what is best for you, and you might need to try a couple of different things before you find what works best for you. So after you've set your time limit, you've picked your sacred word, and you've found your comfortable place to sit, this is when you can begin your centering prayer. And so as you sit, go ahead and start your timer, and you will sit in silence. And you will do your best to keep thoughts and sensations at bay until that time limit is up. So like I said, that is very simple to sit and just explain to someone. It's a lot harder to actually sit and practice it. So next we are going to go over a couple of just tips and some hints on how I have grown in this practice, although I still consider myself a beginner and an amateur at it. There are some things that can help you kind of deepen this practice and to learn how to keep those thoughts pushed aside for your time in centering prayer. So before you start your time in centering prayer, I do want to just tell you about a couple of things that you will encounter the first probably 100 times you try centering prayer. There are things that I still encounter. Your mind will wander, and it will be frustrating, and it will be disappointing, but it's normal, and it's what will happen, and there's no reason to be harsh with yourself about it. Actually, the gentler you are with yourself, I think the easier it is for those thoughts to stop invading your mind. And one of the ways I think about this is that thoughts are going to enter, and the reason we want to set our thoughts aside during this time is I think about when I'm at home, and maybe I'm doing something, maybe I'm checking my email, I'm scrolling through some sort of, app on social media, or I'm reading a book, and one of my kids comes up to me and they want my attention. If I want to be fully present to my child, I have to be willing to set aside whatever is holding my attention so that my attention can then be focused on them. So I have to be willing to set aside my phone, to set aside my book, to step away from the stove for a minute, to give them my full attention. And so it should be no surprise that if we're wanting to be present to the presence of God, that we're going to have to be willing to set aside the things that are drawing our attention away from God. And so in centering prayer, that's most likely going to be the thoughts that kind of just creep into your mind, the sensations in your body that start to arise. Those are the things that are going to try to draw you out of the presence of God. And so we have to learn how to set those things aside for a time so that we can be present to God. There is a story that Father Thomas Keating tells. And I've heard almost any time I've sit on and listened to anyone teach on centering prayer, they bring up this story. It's because it's a beautiful illustration of the heart intention of centering prayer. So one time Father Keating was teaching centering prayer to a group of nuns. And he had gone through the explanation on what to do, and they had all picked their sacred word, they had found their comfortable position, and they did their 20-minute sit. And after this has happened, they were all, coming up and asking questions of Father Keating, talking to one another. And one of the nuns came up to Father Keating and said, "Father, in 20 minutes, I must have used my sacred word 10,000 times." And he could tell the woman was very frustrated. And he looks back at her and he says, "Sister, wonderful. 10,000 opportunities to return to God. And I think that's just such a beautiful story of a way to approach this practice. Instead of being frustrated and disheartened when these thoughts keep coming and coming and you have to keep using that sacred word over and over and over again, instead of meeting all of that with frustration and disappointment, look at it with loving kindness and go, oh, one more opportunity to return to God. One more opportunity to use that word to refocus your attention. And I don't think that's any small thing that you take 10, 15, 20 minutes. And that at every opportunity for a thought to come in, you make the conscious decision to remain in the presence of God rather than to follow that distraction. And I think, and that's the beautiful thing of these practices, is that they're teaching us in small ways how to be attuned to the presence of God. So if I practice on a daily basis 20 minutes of taking my thoughts and going, not right now, I'm going to be with God, then how much more are we going to be able to do that when we're outside of our times of prayer? Will this practice allow me that when I'm in the interaction with someone else to not get swept up in emotions and thoughts and my personality, and instead to tune in to the presence of God so that I can be my best self, that I can be fully present to other people and to God, and to bring my best self to the situations and events of my day, the moments of my day. I think that's a beautiful thing to cultivate, and this practice is one way of cultivating. You cultivate it in a small way in your time of prayer so that it can impact your times when you are not in prayer. And that's what you'll find with centering prayer. The benefits of centering prayer will not be in the midst of the prayer time themselves. I am highly doubting that you're going to have any sort of strong revelation while you're in the midst of centering prayer. But you will notice a difference in your countenance, a difference in your being when you are outside of those times of prayer because of the time that you have spent in the presence of God. So thoughts will come. They are opportunities to return to God, and they will benefit you well beyond the time that you have spent in prayer. If you are really struggling with thoughts coming into your mind, one of the best tips that someone had given me is that when a thought comes into your mind, the best thing to do is to name it. And so a thought comes in and you go, what is that? That's worry. Okay, I'm not going to worry about that right now. And you let it go. You can return to it later. It doesn't mean you can't ever think that thought that was trying to be thought in that moment. Doesn't mean you can't feel those feelings that were trying to crop up when you're in the midst of this prayer time. But it doesn't mean you're going to set them aside for right now and you'll return to them at a later time. So a thought comes in, oh, that's fear. That's fear cropping up right now. I can think about that later. Or maybe it's actually you're having really lovely thoughts. Maybe thoughts of your children or a loved one are coming into your mind. It's okay to set aside thoughts about good things too, because we have a task at hand, and that's to be present to God. All of those things you can return to at a different time. All those things can be thought about and can be felt at a different time. So it's helpful to be able to just, as a thought comes in, to name it for what it is and to go, I'll return to you later. And for me, that is really helpful of being able to let it just go, let it slide off, and to return to the task at hand. Because what we're really trying to find are these little pockets of awareness in between our thoughts, where there's a phrase that a centering prayer teacher, Cynthia Bourgeau, uses. And she talks about an objectless awareness. And it's these gaps between thoughts where we're aware we're in the present moment, but our attention isn't focused on an object. It's focused on just being and being present. And so the more you do centering prayer, the larger those gaps between thoughts, those objectlessness awareness that will happen in between thoughts. At first, they're going to start on real tiny, but as you deepen this practice, you'll notice those gaps happening more and more, and they'll be for longer and longer amounts of time, even though they might just be for a millisecond at first. Another thing that you're probably going to experience while going through a centering prayer set is you're going to feel like you're doing it wrong. And there's really no wrong way to be doing it. If you're sitting in silence and you're focusing your attention, you're using that sacred word as thoughts come in, that's all that you're being asked to do. And I think what's hard about this practice is that there's no real way to feel that you've achieved what you were supposed to achieve with centering prayer, because the goal is presence, and that's really hard to measure, and it's really hard to check a box with that, and that's just something that you're just going to have to let go of, because it's not, the goal is not to check a box. The goal is not to feel a certain way when you're done or to feel a certain way while you're doing it. The goal is presence. The goal is being with God. The last tip I would give to help you in your centering prayer practice is utilizing the power of your breath. If you've ever done any sort of meditative practice, you'll know that breathing is just an important component of it. And one of the reasons I think focusing on your breath can be so powerful and so helpful is that in a lot of ways, breath is a lot like spirit. It's a lot like God, and it's this thing that flows in and out of us effortlessly. It's constantly moving through us, giving us what we need to live, for our body to work, for our blood to move. And we it goes undetected. It's something we don't pay a lot of attention to. It's not something we try to do. It just happens. It happens naturally. And we can breathe on autopilot. I don't have to sit here and think, Sarah, breathe in. Okay, now breathe out. We don't have to do that. And so in a lot of ways, our breath is kind of like the presence of God. It's this thing that's here, whether we're aware of it or not, and it's moving through us, and it's giving us life. And when we stop to focus on our breath, in a way, it helps us to then focus on God. And so, especially as your timer starts, those first couple of minutes, just focus on breathing in and breathing out. You might need to say your sacred word a few times, but if you'll just start your time in silence, focusing on your breath, I think you'll find that it brings a real sense of calm, a real sense of peace, and a real sense of centeredness to your prayer time. And so don't underestimate the power of your breath and what it can do for you. So those are the tips. Those are the hints I have for centering prayer. You've got to just do it and see how it goes for you. This is our last practice in this video series, and I saved it for last because it's the one that has been most transformational in my life. And I think it's because it doesn't ask much of me. There's not a real right or wrong way for me to do it. And the hardest part about it is committing to doing it every day. And I'm not perfect at it. There are times when I take breaks from it. And then there's times when I'm very diligent about it and very disciplined. And I can tell you that the times in my life when I find the discipline and the commitment to do it every day are some of the most fruitful times in my life. And it's not necessarily big things, but I find myself being kinder, find myself being gentler, not only with others, but with myself. And that can be powerful and that can be transformational. And so I hope that this practice can do the same for you. I hope that you give it a chance. I hope that you give it time to really do its work, and that you find a sense of peace with it and a deeper connection with God. Thank you so much for going through this series, for giving it a chance, for being adventurous in your spiritual life. I think these are videos you can come back to over time if you need refreshers on it. But just thank you. Thank you for dialing in and for connecting and for being present to God and present to yourself and being willing to try new things. I think that's what our spiritual life is all about. It's not so much about, it's a journey, sure, but that insinuates there's a destination. I really think it's just about seeking, and seeking new things and seeking new opportunities to experience God and to experience love, and then to share that with others. And so I hope that this series has opened that up for you, and that that's a takeaway for you. And I just have been blessed to be a humble guide for this. So thank you so much. Grace and peace.